Hey guys, tonight we are curling up in the dark corners of a Viking hut, not to fend off dragons or swing axes at enemies, but to whisper about something far more curious. The quiet, mild-mannered magic of runes. Imagine it, cold wind howling outside, your breath a soft cloud in the air, and a piece of driftwood in your hands, carved with ancient symbols, not for power, not for glory, but because your neighbor's goats keep screaming at night and you've simply had enough. Yes, you're going to bed with magic tonight, not epic, fire-hurling, world-ending magic, but the kind that might help you sleep through snoring cousin, or stop your bread from molding too fast. And you probably won't survive this if you expect action-packed scenes with flaming swords. What you will survive is gentle sarcasm, wood smoke-scented detail, and a long, drowsy walk through a very sleepy side of Viking history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel travels. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit cross-legged on a worn bearskin, fiddling with a chunk of driftwood. The fire crackles beside you, throwing shadows against the timber walls, and someone's uncle is already snoring like a thunder god. In your lap rests a dull knife, half rusted, but still good enough to scratch symbols, runes, into the wood. You don't really believe in magic, of course. Not that kind. But then again, you do sleep better when you do this. You press the blade down, dragging it into a shape. A single line, then a cross, then a curl. Not for protection, not for strength, just for sleep. The rune is called lugus, supposedly tied to water, flow, the subconscious. But in this hut tonight, it means, please, no dreams about falling into a fjord again. Historically, runes were part alphabet, part mystery box. They spelled things, but they also meant things. Emotions, elements, moods, warnings. Historians still argue whether the Vikings themselves truly viewed them as spells, or simply as symbolic shorthand. But if your cousin swears that drawing Rido on his shoes helped him find his way home after too much mead, well, who's to say? Outside, the wind picks up. Someone threw more peat on the fire, and the room fills with that damp, earthy smell that always clings to winter evenings. Your rune isn't perfect. The wood splintered a little. It's not about perfection. It's about intention. Vikings weren't obsessed with grand magical tomes or long-winded incantations. Sometimes, the most important rune magic was used for mild annoyances. Think of it as ancient Scandinavian life hacks. Need to keep mice out of your grain sack? Carve Asa for stillness. Want your toddler to sleep through the night? Well, good luck. But some would scratch Berkana onto a cradle leg, just in case. You lean the driftwood against the wall, next to 4 others you've done this week. One to prevent your shoes from squeaking it didn't work. One for courage before talking to that trader's daughter, jury's still out. One to soothe your itchy elbows, and one, unfortunately, for better dreams, which backfired spectacularly with that incident involving eels and your aunt's stew. Still, you believe, not in miracles, but in the quiet act of doing something. Magic wasn't always grand in Viking culture. It wasn't just the realm of vulvas and prophets with face tattoos. It was personal, homemade. You'd scratch a rune into the side of your ale mug to keep your brother from stealing it, or carve one into your walking stick to avoid tripping over the same cursed route every morning on the way to the privy. Some rune uses were even funny. One scratched onto a doorframe in a reconstructed Norse settlement reads, depending on the translator, either luck enter here or only guests who bathe. Both useful, honestly. And then, of course, there's your neighbor, Bjorn. Bjorn is 70% beard and 30% superstition. He believes in rune magic with all the fiery conviction of a man who once fell asleep on a rock and blamed it on cursed trousers. He carved thurisas into his pillow to ward off nightmares, ended up with a neck cramp and a dream about being chased by a giant hedgehog. He tells you this with absolute seriousness over breakfast, chewing on hard cheese that smells like foot. The beauty of Viking runes is their range. Yes, they might protect you from enemies, but they might also just keep your soup from burning. That rune scratched into the hearthstone, it's not a summoning spell. It just means, please heat evenly. And maybe, just maybe, it works better than yelling at the fire. You trace your finger over the carved wood beside you. It's rough, but comforting. A shape made by your hand, imbued with just enough hope to help you drift off. Some people, those people, mock this. They say runes were for war, not woolwich and toast-ups. But evidence suggests otherwise. Archaeologists have uncovered combs with runes on the handles, brooches with strange protective symbols, even bones with nonsense strings of letters, possibly just magical babble, like spiritual doodling. The line between sacred and silly, blurred, endearingly so. The rune you carve tonight begins to glow, not literally, of course, but in your mind. You imagine its shape floating in the dark behind your eyes. A talisman of stillness, of peace. The wind sighs against the door. Someone adjusts their blanket and mutters a half-dreamed curse about sheep. The fire pops, sending a tiny burst of orange light into the room. You pull the blanket tighter, Rune magic isn't loud. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't explode. It nestles. And maybe that's all you need. The next morning, you stretch your back and blink at the pale gray light filtering through the thatch. The fire has died down to embers, but the room still smells faintly of smoke, warm wool, and someone's socks, possibly yours. You shift on the creaky bench and look over at the driftwood rune you carved last night. Still there, still unmagical, but oddly satisfying. You slip it into your satchel anyway. The day starts the way most do here, quietly, until someone yells about fish. There's always a fish-related emergency. You wander down to the shoreline, boots squelching through frost-hardened mud, and find a man standing knee-deep in the freezing water, furiously holding up a rune-inscribed stick and shouting, "It worked!" It did not. His net is empty, his teeth are chattering, and the stick is definitely just a bit of birch bark Thothala scratched into it, supposedly for heritage and inheritance. He swears he read that it also brings bountiful catch. Someone else insists that's mannas. But then again, someone else claims it's fehu, and frankly, nobody agrees. Historians still argue whether these rune associations were standardized or completely made up as they went along. Still, the important part is he believes. You offer him a sympathetic shrug and keep walking. Back on land, the fishless fisherman's friend is carving Sovilo, the sun rune, onto his forehead with charcoal, hoping for better luck. Not real magic, just encouragement. He claims it focuses the brain rays. You don't ask what that means. This is where rune magic lives. Not in thunderbolts or divine revelations, but in small, freezing acts of stubborn optimism. You remember the old tale of Adis the Far-Sighted, who used runes to win a goat dispute. She inscribed Tiwaz, the justice rune, on 12 stones and threw them like dice. They landed in a way she insisted meant her neighbor owed her 3 goats and an apology. The neighbor refused, of course, but the next day 3 goats wandered into her yard anyway, and she said that proved the runes were binding. Coincidence? Probably. Hilarious? Definitely. This blend of practicality and belief wasn't rare. Viking rune users weren't exactly wizards, more like crafty neighbors with excellent branding. One man's magical protection rune was another man's passive-aggressive note left on a chicken coop. You step inside the hall and spot a row of carved bone amulets laid out on a table. They all bear tiny symbols: the Gars for new beginnings, Algis for protection, Urus for strength. The old woman arranging them looks up and nods. "Protection for the baby," she says, motioning to the lump of blankets in the corner, "and strength for the mother. And also, calm. Please, calm." You smile and point to a symbol you don't recognize. She leans in and whispers, "That one's just for keeping the aunts from bickering. Might not be a real rune. I made it up." And there it is again. The blend of ancient mystery and absolute mischief. Because runes, in many cases, weren't bound to strict definitions. Some were historical, others were hopeful improvisations. A symbol becomes powerful the moment someone believes it might be. You step outside and spot your cousin Jorund, he of the sheep theft alibi fame, leaning against the barn, carving something into the wooden post. "What's that one?" you ask. He grins. "A rune to keep the goats from pooping where I step." You pause. "Does it work?" "No," he says. "But now I feel morally superior when it happens." You have to respect the commitment. Modern minds tend to treat ancient people as either too superstitious or too serious. But the Vikings, in their muddy wool tunics and bone-handled knives, clearly had room for both solemnity and silliness. One rune might be etched onto a gravestone, another onto a soup spoon. Some runes were found scratched into walls with no explanation, possibly love notes, possibly bathroom jokes. You've seen the stone near the dock. "Gunvor loved Alifer," it says. Beneath it, "But Alifer smells like fermented seal." You'd like to believe both were written by Gunvor. A cold breeze slices through your cloak, and you head for the blacksmith's shed. Inside, the forge glows orange, the air thick with heat, and the sharp sting of iron. The smith is hammering a horseshoe, but on the blade beside him, you see the faint lines of ahwas carved into the surface. Not a decoration, an intention. "Helps the metal hold," the smith mutters, catching your glance. Keeps it honest. You nod as if this makes sense. You've seen runes like this on weapons, yes, but more commonly on belt buckles, door frames, and drinking horns. The Vikings weren't just enchanting swords. They were enchanting spoons, possibly out of boredom, possibly out of belief, likely both. Even lawstones, those grand mossy rocks around which disputes were settled, often bore rune carvings, not full inscriptions, just a single rune or two scratched deep. Answers, the god rune for words. Berthro, the mystery rune for fate. Some of these could have been official. Others may have been carved by teenagers while waiting for someone to stop yelling about sheep inheritance. And that's the thing. Rune magic in the Viking world was deeply democratic. You didn't need to be a priest or a chief or even particularly literate. You just needed something to carve with and something to carve on. You stop by the weaver's shed. A young girl is threading wool through a loom, humming. Her mother watches proudly. Carved into the loom's side are runes for patience and skill, or so she says. You count at least one that looks suspiciously like a backwards M, but it doesn't matter. It helps. This is how rune magic persists, not in thunderclaps or lightning bolts, but in soft murmurs and quiet scratches. You carry it with you, in your pocket, in your palm, in a carved sliver of driftwood that smells like salt and hope. As you pass the granary, you spot a goat chewing on a plank marked with kenaz, the torch rune, for illumination, for knowledge, possibly for luck with growing crops. The goat seems unimpressed. You sigh, pull out your own bit of rune-carved wood, and hold it up to the light. It's not glowing. It never will. But it's yours. And tonight, when the wind howls and the cousin snoring begins again, you'll carve another. Maybe ansuz for better words in your dreams. Maybe barkana to stop your back from hurting. Maybe a doodle that looks like a confused fish. Who's judging? This is Viking magic. A little serious, a little ridiculous, but always carved with care. By late afternoon, the clouds stretch long and low across the sky like a gray woolen blanket, thick, heavy, and ready to drip. You wrap your cloak tighter and make your way past the edge of the village, where the ground shifts from trampled mud to stubborn, frost-stiffened grass. A crow calls overhead. It might be gossiping, hard to say. You reach the spot where the woods begin. The birch trees, with their peeling white bark, forming a kind of border between people and something older, quieter. You've come here not for a stroll, but to find someone. A man known as Ulfric the Scribbler. He lives somewhere between weird uncle and local folklore. Ulfric, according to rumor, knows how to bind the wind with rune staves. According to Ulfric, he also invented pickled turnip jam and once outran a horse by running backwards. You approach with the cautious optimism of someone about to be offered tea from a skull. His hut appears like a shrug among the trees. Half collapsed, moss-covered, definitely shaped like someone tried to build it from memory. Smoke curls from the top. Encouraging. You knock. No answer. You knock again, more assertively. A creaky voice rasps. If you're here to accuse me of ruining your wheat, the spirits did it, not me. You assure him that you are not. The door opens. Ulfric is shorter than expected, with a beard like old twine, and a nose that looks like it's been broken by a strong opinion. He peers at you, then gestures inside. The hut smells like onions and ink. You glance around. Runes are everywhere, carved into the beams, drawn on the walls, smeared onto sheep skulls, embroidered into the pillowcases. Some are recognizable. Thurisas for protection, Raido for travel. But others seem invented. One looks like a chicken mid-sneeze. He notices your stare. Experimental runes, he says proudly. Ulfric believes in rune binding, the act of merging multiple runes into a single symbol for more complex intentions. In theory, combining ihwaz, movement, and berkana, growth, might create a charm for safe childbirth on long journeys. In practice, it often creates beautiful confusion. especially when you try to draw it on a moving cow. Do they work? You ask. He snorts. Sometimes. But the trick isn't the rune. It's the ritual, the drama. You can't just carve it and walk off like it's a shopping list. He demonstrates. First, he lays out a strip of birch bark and paints it with ash mixed with fermented milk. Very potent, smells like wizardry and regret. Then, he traces the runes with a goose feather, muttering words that are halfway between Old Norse and humming. You watch, fascinated. Historians still argue whether such rune rituals were real or reimagined through sagas, where poetic exaggeration may have inflated a casual scribble into a divine event. Some sagas describe blood rituals, while others mention runes sung into shields or whispered into cups of mead. It's a murky history. Ulfric finishes his rune and ties it to the handle of a shovel. Warding rune for tool thieves, he declares. Also makes the shovel feel like it's judging you if you don't dig straight. You chuckle, but his face is serious. If people believe it works, they behave like it does. And if they behave like it does, then maybe it does. You see? You do. Sort of. Ulfric offers you a cup of something that might be tea, or might be sadness in liquid form. You sip politely and feel your eyebrows tighten. It's fermented moss, he says, for clarity. You leave the hut a little later with a head full of questions and a pouch full of damp bark strips covered in runes, most of which Ulfric has given names like anti-clumsiness, banish awkward silences, and slightly more attractive in firelight. As you walk back toward the village, you run into a woman crouched by the path, rearranging a circle of stones. She glances up. I'm casting a delay charm, she says, for my sister's wedding. You blink. To delay it? She nods. He's nice, but he thinks the moon controls goats. You don't press for details. The stones are etched with runes, one per pebble. She claims each has a purpose. Laguz for flow, Isa for stillness, Jira for cycles. She arranges them like a clock, mutters a poem under her breath, then kicks dirt over the whole thing. Sometimes doing it is enough, she says. The spirits notice effort. You're beginning to understand the charm of this whole thing. Back in the village, evening falls. Smoke rises from chimneys, and you catch the smell of roasted onions and boiled something. A man walks past you muttering, Awaz, like a mantra, slapping his chest twice before entering his house. Inside the great hall, people are carving spoons, mending shoes, darning wool, and casually carving runes into all of them. A boy scratches Gebo, gift, into his mittens, hoping they won't get stolen again. A girl marks Bunjo, joy, onto her bread crust. She eats the rune first. One man carves Otala into the bottom of his mug. His neighbor leans over and whispers, That's not going to stop your wife from drinking it. It's not for her, He grins. It's to make it taste like mine. You sit near the fire and listen as the elders debate a finer point of rune use, whether kenaz could be used to strengthen memory. One swears it worked once. He remembered where he buried his wife's comb. Another says, it's just because she told him again the next morning. There's a story passed around the flames about a farmer who etched runes into his pigs so they wouldn't wander. It failed. The pigs wandered even farther, possibly because they felt special. And then there's the tale of the rune singer, a woman who supposedly hummed runes into her weaving so that her tapestries changed color in the moonlight. No one ever saw it happen, but no one wanted to challenge her either, because she looked like she could summon bees. As the fire crackles and the sky darkens, you run a finger along your own driftwood rune. It's already softening at the edges, worn from your pocket and your palm. But that feels right. Magic here isn't preserved. It's used, rubbed down, spoken aloud, carved into the mundane. You press it against your forehead and whisper something halfway between a wish and a joke. Then you toss it into the fire. It hisses, sparks once, and is gone. That might not be magic, but it feels like something. And here, that's enough. You wake to the sound of someone arguing with a goat. Not just any goat, mind you. A particularly obstinate creature named Frigg, who, by all local accounts, can climb ladders, untie knots, and once ate an entire spindle of dyed wool. Right now, she's resisting being moved with all the grace of a wet sack full of elbows. The voice belongs to Hallgerd, the weaver. She's scolding Frigg not just in words, but with runes. She waves a wooden spoon marked with manas and nauthis, as if she's casting a mild bureaucratic curse. You need cooperation, she mutters, and you need urgency. The goat headbutts a fence post in reply. You sit up, stretch, and marvel at how casually everyone around you leans into the logic of runes. They aren't always solemn or sacred. Sometimes they're a tool of gentle coercion, like writing please in capital letters with a wink. Hallgerd sees you and waves. Morning. I'm trying to convince Frigg she's late to a funeral. You ask if the runes are helping. Not yet, she admits, but I think she respects the effort. Breakfast is a porridge so thick it holds the spoon upright, like a flag of surrender. You eat beside a carpenter who swears by a rune he carves into every doorframe. Ehwaz for sturdiness. It's not the wood that matters, he explains. It's the feeling that it won't fall. You nod, chewing slowly. As the day unfolds, you begin to see how rune use weaves through everyday life, not in flashes of lightning or ghostly whispers, but in small, persistent gestures. A mother ties a child's shoes and draws Algi's protection on the soles with her thumb. A man spits on a coin before spending it, muttering Fehu for luck. No one blinks. There's an old man named Sten who talks to his cows using a rune stick. Just a carved branch with 4 runes on it: Uruz, Ehwaz, Dagaz, Sovilo. Strength, movement, breakthrough, and success. He says, if he waves it too hard, they gallop. If he forgets it, they ignore him. You think it's the magic, he tells you, but it's also the consistency. The cows expect the pattern. Historians still argue whether rune use in daily Viking life was mostly symbolic, functional, or purely performative. Were they spells, labels, or elaborate reminders to stay hopeful? The answer, possibly, is yes to all. You follow a group of villagers into the woods, where a shallow stream cuts across a mossy hollow. A woman named Astrid is performing a rune blessing for her niece's wedding. It involves pressing rune stones into the mud, letting water flow over them, and singing a verse that includes the words, "Don't forget to bathe, ever." Astrid claims she once used runes to prevent a thunderstorm from ruining a wedding feast. When asked how she knew it worked, she shrugs, because it didn't rain. Hard to argue with that kind of success. Nearby, children are drawing runes in the dirt, assigning them powers that range from keeps you warm to makes goats kiss you. One kid draws a backwards tiwaz and says it gives battle hugs. His older sister rolls her eyes, but draws a matching rune anyway. You realize, watching them, that this rune use isn't just imitation, it's how belief sustains itself. When magic is embedded in lullabies, chores, and arguments with livestock, it's not about faith in the extraordinary. It's about enchantment with the ordinary. At midday, you pass by a field where 2 farmers are having a disagreement over who owns a suspiciously straight row of cabbage. One of them has brought a rune-inscribed stick. The other has brought lunch and sarcasm. The stick has 4 runes burned into it: Otala, Jera, Raido, and Thurisaz. Home, harvest, journey, and challenge. It's not exactly subtle. They argue for a while. One gestures toward the row with a deeply wounded expression. The other counters with, "Well, then why is your cabbage smaller?" Which, in Viking logic, is apparently a power move. Eventually, the one with the runestick says something in a calm voice, touches the Othala rune with 2 fingers, and turns away. The other man stands there, thinking. Then he picks a cabbage and mutters, "Fine, but only the topsoil is yours." You don't know who won, but you know it was settled. By the time the sun starts leaning west, you stop by a tiny wooden shrine. Inside is a pile of flat stones, each carved with a single rune, placed like prayers. Some are faded, some fresh. You find Wunjo, Kinaz, Laguz, joy, knowledge, intuition. You don't touch them, but you look. You hear someone approaching, a young woman carrying a bundle of reeds. She pauses at the shrine, closes her eyes, and whispers something about her sister's dream. Then she pulls a stone from her pocket. places it gently on the stack, and walks away. You peek, Ansus, inspiration, divine breath. Later, in the village, the mood is soft. A light drizzle begins to fall, and people gather under overhangs and inside the hall. Someone lights a brazier, and the smell of damp wool and singed herbs mixes in the air. You sit near the hearth again and listen to the latest tale. A man who tried to charm his beard to grow faster by carving Barkana into his comb. The rune worked too well. The beard now reaches his knees. His wife made him braid it or sleep outside. Someone else tells of a woman who tried to use Isa to freeze a rival's soup. The soup exploded. She's fine, just startled, and slightly broth-scented. These stories aren't always reverent, but they're affectionate, because runes here aren't feared. They're familiar. They're part of a long conversation between people and the world around them, like writing a note to the wind. It might not write back, but it might, and that's worth doing. You pull your cloak tighter, watching the fire flicker across the carved pillars of the hall. You find yourself mouthing a rune, Ehwaz, and tracing it lightly on your palm. No reason, just to see. And for a moment, the hall seems warmer, not magically, just meaningfully. The next morning, someone wakes you with a question. Do you dream in runes yet? You blink at the woman crouched beside your bedroll. Brilliant eyes, wild hair, and a grin like she knows the answer already. Her name, she tells you, is Brynja. She's a rune poet, a Galdrakona, and apparently you're coming with her. Before you can invent a polite excuse or fake your own death, she tosses you a chunk of bread, says, "Eat on the way," and walks off humming. You follow, because of course you do. She leads you uphill, past the village, through a patch of trees that smell of pine needles and stubbornness. You reach a flat outcropping of rock overlooking a narrow fjord. The wind slaps your cheeks awake. Below, the sea sparkles like a spilled pouch of silver coins. Brynja sits and spreads out a piece of cloth embroidered with runes. Not carved this time, but stitched in saffron and teal. She points to one, Laguz, the water rune. This one tastes different when sung near the sea, she says, as if that makes any kind of sense. She starts chanting. It's not a song exactly. It's more like a slow, deliberate drawing of sounds. Her voice rises and falls in lilting spirals, some syllables stretched until they melt, others clipped like she's trimming reality itself. You feel your skin hum a little. She stops abruptly. Now you try. You point out, you don't know the song. She shrugs. That's the point. You hum. Hesitantly, the wind steals your voice. But Brynja nods. Good, awful, perfect. She flips the cloth, revealing different runes. Kinaz for knowledge, Ansus for breath, Ehwaz for movement. We're not calling on gods, she says. We're waking up the space between words. Historians still argue whether rune chanting or Galdr was truly believed to manipulate the world, or if it was just a kind of Viking TED talk, stirring, poetic, occasionally overlong. But there's no denying the effect it has on people, even you. You spend the morning like that, chanting, tracing, learning. Brynja shows you how runes can be paired to blend meanings. Therisas and Raido together might mean travel with caution, or beware of uninvited trolls. Context is everything. She tells you about a man who carved runes into his boat to ward off storms, but accidentally included Hagalas, the rune of destruction. The boat split in half, she says, and a herring swam right through his tunic. You're not sure if it's a cautionary tale or a comedy. At one point, Brynja places her hand on the rock and sings a single Isa, a rune for stillness, for ice, for pause. You feel your breath slow. Even the birds go quiet. Then she sighs, stands, and says, "That's enough sacred nonsense. Time for goat duty." You blink. "Yes," she says, "the goats are cursed." You follow her down to a muddy pen where 3 goats are standing in what looks like a perfect triangle. They refuse to move. One keeps sneezing, another is staring at the sun like it owes her money. Brynja holds out a carved rune stick. Just Ehwaz repeated thrice. For movement, she says, or at least the illusion of authority. She waves the stick. The goats do nothing. She waves it harder. The middle goat farts. "Okay," she mutters. "We need backup." She grabs a bowl of pickled herring and draws a quick rune in the mud with a fishtail. The goats blink, then wander off as if nothing had happened. You stare. Brynja shrugs. Sometimes magic needs a snack. You're starting to see a pattern. Runes here aren't rigid tools. They're suggestions, polite nudges to the universe, like leaving a post-it note on your own destiny. Later, back in the village, you find an old man hunched over a stone. He's carving something slowly, as if each line carries the weight of years. You ask what he's writing. "A complaint," he says. "To the gods." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. "About my knees." He's using Nauthiz, the rune of need, followed by Uruz, strength, and Berkana, growth. "Basically," he explains, "I'm asking for strong knees and more beer." In that order. You ask if it works. He pats his knees. They haven't collapsed yet, and the mead keeps arriving. Historians still debate whether everyday people truly believed runes held power, or whether using them was more like superstition meets self-therapy. But either way, there's a kind of peace in the act. Carve the worry, sing the hope, trace the need. You walk through the village at sunset, the sky bleeding gold into ash. Smoke curls from chimneys. Someone is drawing runes on the lid of a soup pot. Another carves them into bread crusts. A child writes Wunjo on her forehead with a berry. You sit beneath a tree, half listening to the evening sounds, goats, laughter, a very heated debate about whether Divas can be reversed to mean betrayal or just very strong loyalty in the wrong direction. Brynja sits beside you. She hums a tune you don't know. You try to hum along. It doesn't match. She grins. Now it does. You ask if she really believes the runes work. She's quiet a moment. I believe they help people make meaning, she says. And sometimes that's more powerful than truth. You let the words settle. The stars begin to blink through the dusk. You can't read the sky, but you could swear it's written in runes. The next morning begins with smoke. Not ominous, just breakfast. Someone's burning porridge again. And across the damp field, someone else is trying to chant the Sovilo rune into a bonfire. It's going poorly. The fire refuses to catch, and the chanter insists it's because the sun isn't emotionally aligned with the wood yet. You decide not to get involved. Instead, you drift toward the market tents, really more like open-air blanket zones where people sell anything from seal pelts to carved combs, all with varying degrees of shouting. And under it all, threaded into every transaction, are runes. Not the magical ones this time, not exactly. These are rune marks scratched into soapstone weights, or burnt onto driftwood tags, or traced into the wet dirt beside someone's stall. Fehu for wealth, Jera for harvest, Dagas for luck and beginnings. It's commerce with an artistic flourish. You spot a young man polishing a bone pendant etched with Othala. Heritage. For my sister's wedding, he says proudly. Not because you asked, but because runes always seem to invite explanation. Historians still argue whether these everyday uses were truly magical or just decorative shorthand for wishes. Some say they were like emojis with consequences. Others insist they were legal symbols, like stamping your intentions into the world with sharp conviction. You pause near a tent where an older woman is engraving runes into the soles of sandals. You raise an eyebrow. She nods sagely. Two confused demons, she says. You wait to see if she's joking. She is not. You pass a man whispering at his fishing net, fingers brushing the strands like a harp, each knot punctuated with a quiet Therisas. That's the rune of chaos and reactive power. You ask why. He shrugs. For dramatic fish. There's a rhythm to this marketplace. Every transaction is more than barter. It's a miniature performance. Someone buys a smoke deal and spits on the ground before handing it over. Someone else draws Reidho in the air over a coin, as if blessing the journey of payment itself. You wander toward the center, where a low table displays dozens of rune sticks, each bundled with twine and moss. A sign reads, practical charms. For sale, not guaranteed. You pick one up. It's carved with Isa Ehwaz and something you don't recognize. A squiggle that looks suspiciously like a snail wearing a helmet. The seller leans in. That's experimental. You put it down. Next to you, two women argue over a rune carved into a child's wooden spoon. One claims it's manas for community. The other insists it's algiz for protection. The child, meanwhile, is happily using the spoon to dig a hole in the mud, possibly summoning ancient forces, possibly just looking for worms. You head toward the edge of the market, where the mood softens. Fewer crowds, more quiet traders. An old man offers you a rune, reading, "No pressure, just insight and vague dread." You agree, of course. He doesn't use cards. Just a small cloth bag filled with bone chips. He shakes it gently, hums a tune with no melody, then drops them onto a slab of slate. The chips fall in a lopsided pattern. Naudids, bird throw, laguz. Need, he says, tapping the first. Chance. He taps the second. Water. He stares at you. You're thirsty and unprepared. You tell him that's just because you skipped breakfast. He nods solemnly. As I said, you offer him a coin. He declines. Truth should never be too expensive. As you leave, you see another man carving runes into a turnip, just methodically etching wunjo over and over into its pale surface. Joy, he says. Joyful stew. You move on quickly. Back in the main field, the atmosphere is shifting. You hear drums. Not battle drums, thankfully, but ritual ones. Slow, echoing, meant to make the air feel like it's listening. And maybe it is. People gather in a ring around a raised stone circle. Not the law rock. This is smaller. A rune circle. For binding, for unraveling, for communal magic when needed. A woman steps into the center, her cloak the color of smoke and old blood. She raises a hand, and the crowd quiets. She begins to speak, not loudly, but with that trained cadence that holds every ear. She's talking about a curse. A minor one, she insists. Someone's sheep keep wandering to the same hill and refusing to come down. They get stuck there, staring at the sea. It's eerie, unnatural. The sheep are planning something. So she's asking for a binding rune. Something to anchor their little woolly minds. 3 other people step forward, each proposing a solution. One offers a simple Isa and Raido combination. Another suggests adding tiwaz for spiritual discipline, whatever that means for sheep. The third just says, let them go. They clearly have goals. Eventually, they agree on a compromise. Ehwaz for movement, bound with sovilo for light. Then they draw it together on birch bark over a bowl of ash and into the air with their fingers. The ritual ends with polite clapping and the distant sound of a sheep sneezing. You think about how many of these rune uses are about control, but soft control, suggestions to the world, invitations, not demands. You pass someone writing runes on the inside of their cloak, hidden protection. Another has carved berkana into the handle of a ladle. One child has traced udhala onto a sleeping cat's back with berry juice. The cat remains unimpressed. That evening, as the light stretches thin across the sky, you settle near a cook fire with others. Someone's boiling herbs. Someone else is telling a story about a man who tried to curse his neighbor's pig, only for the pig to inherit his estate after he mysteriously vanished. You nod like this makes sense now. The firelight flickers, casting runes onto the stones. Patterns of answers and kenas, echoing wisdom and insight. Or maybe just the need to look clever in the dark. Someone passes you a piece of bread with a tiny rune burned into the crust. You bite it. It's dry. You decide it's probably a ward against disappointment. You wake to fog. It creeps along the ground like a careful thief, muffling sound and softening shapes until everything looks like a half-remembered dream. You stretch, crack your spine in 3 different languages, and notice someone walking in slow circles, muttering rune names under their breath. You squint. They're holding a leek. Apparently, it's for guidance. No one questions it. The morning rituals at the thing are a strange blend of the spiritual, the superstitious, and the sincerely confused. Someone lights a candle in front of a carved Theresa's rune for protection. Someone else lights another beside it to balance the energy. Within minutes, it's a full shrine of mismatched offerings. Pine cones, shiny stones, a chicken feather, a surprisingly well-preserved apple core. This is how runes work here. Not grand spells of world-shaking magic, but quiet attempts to nudge reality. Like sending a memo to the universe, written in jagged lines and crossed fingers. You wander past a row of tents where people are practicing rune writing. A boy with inky fingers has managed to reverse algiz and now claims he's cursed with clumsiness. His tunic agrees. He's already stepped in 3 different stews. A stern-looking woman corrects his strokes. You reverse the protection, she says. Now it attracts danger. The boy nods, solemn, then falls off the bench. You keep walking. Nearby, someone is etching runes into a piece of driftwood. While standing on one foot, you raise an eyebrow. They nod gravely. For balance, they whisper, as they promptly topple sideways. You're starting to understand the underlying pattern here. The more mundane the inconvenience, the more magical the response. There's a man trying to carve kenaz, the rune of illumination, onto a damp torch. To help it light better, he explains. The torch smolders, sighs, then goes out completely. He shrugs. It's symbolic. You pass by a couple arguing in low voices. One has painted Gebo, the gift rune, on the other's sleeve. It's not a love spell, they insist. It's just emotional clarity. Historians still argue whether runes were ever truly believed to alter reality, or if they were more like performance art. Actions taken seriously because taking them seriously felt important. You lean toward the latter, or maybe both. You've seen people weep over burnt toast. Humans don't need much to believe in something. Someone has set up a small shrine to Laguz, the water rune by the stream. Offerings include a mussel shell, 3 drops of mead, and what looks suspiciously like a bottle cap. You don't ask questions. You pause at the edge of the woods, where a group of children are playing a game that involves drawing runes in the mud and daring each other to step on them. If you land on Hagalas, you lose a finger, one girl says cheerfully. You step away quietly, counting your fingers. At midday, a strange hush falls over the gathering. Word spreads quickly. Someone's found a curse rune. Not just a squiggle in the mud or a sloppy mistake, but a deliberate binding rune carved beneath the drinking trough. Old wood, deep lines, blackened edges. You join the swelling crowd that gathers around it. No one touches it. A few whisper guesses. It's Isis mixed with Naudis. That's not a real rune. It's just someone's initials. I think it's a prank. Eventually, the law speaker arrives. He crouches beside the carved mark, stares for a long time, then simply says, "Clean it." A woman steps forward with a bundle of sage and a bowl of milk. She pours the milk over the rune, chanting softly. The carving drinks it like thirsty bark. Then she scatters ash over the wood and traces Berkana, rebirth, on top. The tension breaks. People laugh nervously. Someone jokes about cursed goats. A man insists this is why you never share drinking troughs with merchants from the next fjord. You're left wondering, was it real? Did someone truly mean harm? Or was it just a bit of drama to spice up the day? Evening creeps in on soft feet. You settle near a low fire where someone's holding a rune. Storytelling circle. A wide-eyed woman leans forward and begins. There was once a man who carved ehwaz into every beam of his house for strength, she says. But he made one mistake. Just one. Everyone leans closer. He carved Berthro by the door instead of ehwaz, chance instead of strength. You wait. The house collapsed. Not right away, but every time he walked through that door, he invited the unknown in. Until one day, the unknown stayed. You sip your water. It suddenly tastes more exciting. Another story follows. A love triangle resolved by scratching ingwaz, the seed rune, into a lock of hair and burying it beneath a turnip field. It worked, the storyteller says, but no one ever looked at turnips the same way again. You begin to wonder if this is less history and more medieval soap opera. Still, the runes persist, not as powerful, commanding magic, but as quiet symbols whispered into wood and wool and bread and breath. Runes here aren't about might, they're about meaning. The night settles thick and smoky. You look up and see someone projecting runes onto a tent wall with firelight and a cut piece of antler. It flickers, morphs, becomes shapes you almost understand. Beside you, someone mutters, "That's Ansu's, a message. Someone's calling something." You ask what? They shrug. Could be wisdom, could be their goat. Hard to tell these days. You lie back, head on a folded tunic, staring at the sky that now wears its runes in stars. Shapes form if you want them to. Raido in Orion's belt, Sovilo in the arc of the moon, maybe even Dagas hiding in the horizon, waiting for morning. You close your eyes. There's magic in the mundane. There's power in the petty. And in this Viking world of small complaints and quiet enchantments, you're beginning to think the most powerful rune isn't carved in bone or etched in ash. It's the one you believe in just enough